South Carolina contending in 2023. It's an interesting concept to think about, possibly. Shane Beamer's doing some good things in Columbia. We got Chris Phillips on the line, the Spurs Up Show, the Daily Crow. He's got it all working right there, and we will find out from him exactly what the content offering is these days. Chris, always good to see you.
Mark, it's always a pleasure, man. And like we always say, it's never a bad time to talk college football. Obviously, you see my attire. We're right in the thick of baseball season, and what the Yardcocks are doing, absolutely incredible. We're just coming off our conversation right now. We're just coming off last night. Gamecocks taking down number 1 LSU in game 1 of their series in very loud fashion, if you will. So it feels like Gamecocks baseball is back, but of course, South kind of football going through spring practice and the spring game. Yes, Mark, just over a week away, and there are, as always, a lot of storylines to get into, and you can definitely feel, right, the anticipation building as we get to the spring game, but beyond that, I'm starting to see some over-under totals come out, starting to see some way too early predictions drop, some SEC banter, if you will. So, again, you know as well as I do, Mark, it's SEC football season 24/7, 365, and that's why we love it. But, again, appreciate the opportunity, my friend. It's a great time to chat with you.
Chris, you know how college football fans, South Carolina fans are. They want info, and they think like every day of every practice, there should be like this scouting report that comes out with the latest, and it just doesn't work that way. It's too tightly concealed right there. There's only so much video that comes out, so much practice reports that come out. You almost have to rely on what are the players saying, what are the coordinators and the head coach saying. So I'm going to go to you in regards to anything that's happened in the last month that catches your eye.
Well, and I would agree with you, Mark, and I would tell fans that no news is good news when it comes to spring practice, because typically if something is making headlines, it's not a good thing, right? It's typically somebody got hurt, somebody got in trouble, right? We've seen that across college football. So normally you like it kind of to be just business as usual, ho-hum, if you will, and get to the spring game and get through spring ball and everything is status quo. But, there have been some things, and of course, Mark, if you're diehards like we are and you read between the lines and you listen to what these players and coaches say, you can sort of uncover some different things. I think the biggest one is this, Mark. We talked about the running back position. Marshawn Lloyd departs. He's now at Southern Cal, and that is a position of, dare I say, concern. Lack of depth, if you will, is an issue heading into the spring. De'Carrion Joyner is getting significant reps at the running back position. And that sort of became something at the start of spring ball. He was taking reps at running back just to open up spring, right? And you thought to yourself, okay, maybe there's going to get a look, see how it is, and we'll go from there. But it sounds like he is actually, I heard yesterday he's running with the 2s in practice. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how he looks at the running back position in that spring game. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it's something. I mean, this is the time of year, obviously, Mark, to experiment, just see what you have. And I mean, heck, we've seen De'Carrion Joyner throughout his Gamecocks career. It feels like he's played everything under the sun. And every time he touches the football, he seems to make plays. A guy, for whatever reason, has not been able to get on the field more often, but he's natural with the football in his hands. Could he really carry the load and handle the strain in the SEC of week to week being an SEC running back? I'm not exactly sure, but I think he just provides another weapon for you. And so that's been a big storyline, Mark, of just what exactly do you have in De'Carrion Joyner at the running back position. From what I've heard, Spencer Rattler has had a good spring. Now, is that going to catch any headlines? Not necessarily, and you would expect him to have a good spring, but it sounds like all things are going well for him and Dowell Loggins and the system and the scheme and what have you. On the defensive side, I think it's just young guys they've been talking about. Grayson Pup Howard at the linebacker position, from what I've heard, he looks like a SEC linebacker. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but for a true freshman, it does sound like he's going to make an immediate impact for this Gamecocks football team. And outside of that, nothing really crazy to report. I mean, again, Mark, it's one of those things where Shane Beamer talks about a scrimmage, if you will, and he's saying, well, the offense only had 1 turnover. Well, is that good for the offense, bad for the defense? And then when the defense does well, it's great for the defense, but is it bad for the offense? Like, it's really hard to figure out exactly what you have. But, I would say that a De'Carrion Joyner thing has probably been the biggest storyline at this point, which is a good thing. Again, Mark, you don't want any negative news leading the way. And I think all things have been sort of business as usual, status quo, and excited to see kind of just what you have and what it looks like in the spring game. You can't draw conclusions. I always warn fans, don't draw conclusions from a spring game. It's literally a scrimmage. It's literally an exhibition. Oh, by the way, also, I think the comments of Shane Beamer and Hugh Freeze, those have been some top storylines, them talking about what they like to see for spring games in the future, right, Mark? Maybe a game in that spot, maybe a scrimmage, an exhibition against somebody else. So that's been a really fun talking point as well. But outside of that, the Dakereon Joyner news, I think that's been leading the way. And, thankfully that's been the lead headline and not something negative, if you will.
Hey, Chris, let's go down that path of possible spring opponents, whether that's an FCS or a group of five. Where do you stand on that? What do you think that could possibly look like?
I'd love to see it. I think it'd be incredible. And I think back to what Hugh Freeze said, right? I didn't think about it this way. It's like you're cutting injuries, the risk of injury in half when you think about it, because right now in a spring game, you've got offense on defense. So you've got your starting 22, let's say, out there at one time. If you're playing somebody else, you only have your starting 11 out there at once, right? I think that there should probably be some rules in place, obviously, and stipulations if you play somebody else, right? You're going to have players that are non-contact. I don't think if you're playing like a lesser opponent, especially, you should just leave your starters out there the entire game and run up the score. And I mean, what good does it do to beat somebody in a spring game 77-0, right? Like the beauty of spring games is that guys that don't normally get to play, they get to play, and it's an opportunity for them to get out there in front of fans and take the field and just kind of get a feel of what game day is right at your respective stadium. So, but I love the idea because right now, Mark, let's face it, as much as you and I love college football, we all love college football, the spring game is a glorified scrimmage. I mean, it is. It is, bottom line. The hype and the hoopla leading up to the spring game is more fun and exciting most of the time than the actual spring game itself. Like us doing this and talking about it and, who could flash and who could pop off and like these visions we have dancing in our head. Normally it's more fun because you get to the spring game. And I remember last year I was sitting there. It's not a knock on anybody. It just is what it is. I remember sitting there being like, this is kind of boring. Spencer Rattler didn't throw a pass, I think, further than like 20 yards down the field. And he was only out there for like 2 series. And you're like, it is a scrimmage. It really is. It's an exhibition. So I think anything to kind of juice it up, spice it up a bit. And it sounds like the coaches support it. I think, I did this on my podcast suggesting opponents. I think seeing South Carolina play somebody like a Charleston Southern, like a Furman, like a Wofford, SC State, I think that would be good. If you don't want to do a full-on game, do 7-on-7. Do one-on-ones with linemen. I think there are creative ways to do it to spice up the spring game, if you will. And if you don't do that, I think fans will continue to show up and show out, and it'll be a great thing. But, also, too, the impact you could have on charity and different things, raising money. I think people would pay to go. We don't get a lot of college football as it is. You only get 7 opportunities on your home field to watch your team. Why not add another, right? And I think there's a lot of good that could come of it. So I am in full support of it, Mark Rogers. I'm curious, though, since you asked me, I'll turn it on you. What are your thoughts on it? Do you like the idea, hate the idea? And I'll just ask you this, because obviously you talk college football nationally. How do you feel about spring games? I mean, do you make a big deal of them? Is it something where you find yourself kind of similar to me where you're like, oh, yeah, this is just a spring game? Because, it's very easy to pick and pull certain clips, and there's always a spring game standout that he's going to steal the starting job. Like, it never fails that people overreact to spring games. And I'll say this just before I let you answer. J.C. Sherbert of the Big Spur came on my show yesterday, and I asked him the same question about that, whatever. He brought up a very interesting point, Mark. Can you imagine a coach like a Brian Harsin or like a coach that's on the hot seat, right? A real hot seat. And they play, let's say Auburn played Troy in their spring game and they lose. Or it's like a really close game. Could we see coaches getting fired after a spring game? Is that possible? That sounds crazy, but we know the passion of SEC and college football fans. Like, it would not shock me.
I would hope that wouldn't happen, because let's understand what real football is, right, and what are the games that count. But I was going to go down a similar path, because before you said that, my thought was I would be intrigued to see how different coaches would play it and how important they would deem this game, because even though it's an exhibition game, yes, if you are not comfortable with your program, with your situation, what you do, then it's 21-17 against Troy in the fourth quarter. I don't want this to look bad because I'm going to have to hear about it for the next 4 months, versus some coaches just saying, I don't care. I'm good with what we do. We had a schedule today. I don't care if we lose 59-0. This is what we do. We're just practicing. Not a big deal. But other coaches, there's no doubt that would impact, because it's another opponent, because the TV cameras are on, and because they're keeping score. That's going to affect some coaches there's no question about that based on their job security.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's wild to think about. It really is. He brought that up, and I'm like, I had not even for a moment considered that. But
the firing part of it, I never considered.
Right.
Just, do they handle this different? And I don't think there's any question. It's human nature that if you're a coach who's not feeling
so are coaches even willing to? Because I'm sure for where there's people like Shane Beamer and Hugh Freeze, I'm sure there are coaches that are against it. I'm sure there are. Like, I'm sure there's plenty of them that are like, I kind of like how we've been doing things forever. Let's not change, right? Because not everybody likes change, of course. But either way, I'll lead it back to this, though, Mark. Do you like spring games? I mean, how's your feeling? Again, you cover college football nationally. Is it something that you feel like it moves the needle for you, or is it just kind of it is what it is?
Well, one last thing about this idea of playing opponents is while we're in this mode of we're going to a 12-team college football playoff and there's concern that there's going to be too much football being played, we're going to extend a season to 16 to 17 games for certain teams. I'm kind of surprised or would be surprised if this would get passed unilaterally across the board to add another, even though it doesn't count, a game action on the calendar for these athletes when they're trying to limit number of plays. They're putting in rules to limit number of plays and doing all those things when we're increasing the back end of the schedule. So I might be a little bit surprised by that. Now, in terms of spring games, I've been watching college football forever, and I'm still enough of an idiot to get partially excited. Just a little bit of me gets a little bit excited January, February, when the spring game dates come out, to think, oh, look who's playing on April 15th. Yeah. Chris, it takes about 3 plays in a spring game for me to the realization to set in. Okay, this is not, like you said, it's boring. It is boring. If the networks finally caught on, a few years ago to say, we can't broadcast this like a football game. We can't do play-by-play. 4th and 3 is not critical. This is not a football game. Yeah. We need to present it as a TV show. This is a 2023 season preview. Talk to coaches, talk position battles. Let's present it like a TV show. And that's what I get out of it. I want to know more about South Carolina football because I watched this game and the game's almost like running in the background. While they kind of present what this team is going to look like to me.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense too. And I think to the point of the networks, I mean, I think that's how you have to air it because, again, it's not a football game. I mean, what makes football and really sports in general, but football so great is that there is something on the line, like you mentioned, like a 3rd and long, 4th and 3. Like there's something major on the line and you're hanging on every single play. And again, you only get 12 of these opportunities. Like it's the scarcity that makes football so special, right? Like why is it more intense than baseball, basketball? Well, because it's football. You're in this small pocket, and it's these short, bursts, these short explosions, if you will, right? And that's what makes it so intense. Whereas, baseball, for example, is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right? So you lose a game, it's no big deal. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly the spring game, it clicks very quickly. But for what it is, I mean, I think I will say too, though, for fans, it's a great thing to get the kids out there, get the family. It's free. You get out there, you get in your stadium again. You see some new players out there in the jersey. You get autographs. Like it's a cool thing for what it is. But it is funny sometimes. Like I'll do a full spring game preview, like all that, and then I'll sit there and be like, it's a scrimmage. Like it's a scrimmage. But some of my best memories, I'll say though, as a kid, were like going to the spring game. Like I was at Spurrier's first spring game at Carolina, and you could just feel the energy and the excitement in the stadium. And I'll never forget, like when the first play of the game, they threw a pass and everybody's just freaking out because we had been in this Lou Holtz wishbone offense type thing. And it's like, oh my God, we're throwing the ball. Like, so I've got some good memories from spring games, but yeah, I mean, it just sort of is what it is, but we'll see what happens next weekend. And of course we get going this weekend with Auburn and Vanderbilt in their spring games. Then really next week where you kick into gear with Florida on Thursday night and then a lot of them on Saturday, April the 15th, and then Bama and LSU on the 22nd, I believe. So yeah, it's I do love, Mark, that it really just throws us the alley-oop, if you will, not to change sports, but it throws us the alley-oop to proverbially slam dunk and talk college football and talk SEC football. And I mean, who couldn't love that?
Chris, you just hit on the key. The entire key to the spring game is the weather forecast. That is the entire key. I tuned on the Michigan spring game, and because I'm a glutton and because of what I do, we did a watch party for the Michigan spring game. It's like 42 degrees and spit and rain. And I'm thinking, If it's 75 degrees, the spring game's great. Yeah, I'll hang out there with my family, with my friends, and just let football kind of play out in front of me. If I want to watch a play, don't want to watch a play, I'm soaking in the sun. That's a good time. But if it's 40, I'm thinking, why are these people there?
Yeah. I'll be doing a live stream watch along next weekend as well. So now it'll be a good time. And again, I'm really excited for it.
Chris, on the recruiting front, 6 hard commits, top 10 class right now. That doesn't mean a whole lot. A lot of weekend visits coming up. A lot have just taken place. Any thoughts about Shane Beamer and what the coaching staff's working on for this summer?
Yeah, well, I'll say this, the latest commitment, Mark, Blake Franks, an offensive lineman they picked up over just a little bit over a week ago or so. I think it was a week ago to the date, actually. But Blake Franks, and the big deal of that is he's a 3-star offensive lineman, sure, but out of Greenville High School in Greenville, South Carolina. And Mark, you know who else wanted him? The arch rival, Clemson. They wanted him. They offered him. It was a recruiting battle between the Gamecocks and the Tigers, and Shane Beamer won. So to me, I mean, that might seem small to some, but I think what you're seeing, Mark, is slowly but surely they are turning the tide in recruiting. And I'm not sitting here telling you they're going to have a top 5 class in the 2024 class or maybe even top 10. But for anybody who had concerns about Shane Beamer and the recruiting side of things when he took the job, right? Because he had never been a head coach. Like, you have no idea what you're getting at that point. But I think anybody who had concerns on the recruiting side, I think it's safe to say that Shane Beamer, he knows what he's doing, right? I mean, he loves the University of South Carolina. You have on-field results to back up what you're preaching. And, they've got a message that they're selling to these kids. And it's working. I mean, it's working for sure. So, obviously next weekend will be a big weekend in regards to visits and stuff like that. Brad Lawing's a good friend of mine that was a former defensive line coach at South Carolina, coached the best in school history, Jadeveon Clowney and many others, and, coached in the SEC and all across college football for 30-plus years, if you will. But he told me, Chris, and this was before all the facility upgrades, but he was speaking about Beamer and recruiting and the success. He said, Chris, you feel like if you're at South Carolina, even when I was there, and I would assume even more so now, you get a kid on campus, you're going to get him. Like, you feel confident, especially if you get in there for game day. If you get in there inside Williams-Brice Stadium and he sees all those towels go and there's 80,000 in there, like, the odds you get him are really high. And so now you've got a head coach in Shane Beamer who's got that infectious personality. I mean, he's one of the more fun follows in college football, I think, right? He's one of these new age coaches that is all over social media, isn't afraid to speak his mind, isn't afraid to jab back at people, if you will, for better or for worse. But he's out there, and people know who he is, and he's one of those fun coaches that I think kids want to play for. And that's what you're seeing, and it goes hand in hand, Mark, right, Mark? You need great – I always talk about this like the chicken or the egg conversation, no pun intended. You need great players to win, but you need to win to attract great players. Like, do you get Nicholas Harbor if you go 6-6 last year? Maybe you do, but I don't know for certain you do. Does it make it more attractive and more appealing for a guy like Nick Harbor? Like, does he maybe go to Oregon instead because he says, they went 6-6. They lost 3 in a row to close the season. Are they really on the up and up? I can go to Oregon. They're pretty solid. They're pretty set. Probably going to win 10 games this year. You know what I mean? Like, winning attracts guys like that. Attracts guys like that. So when you combine the two, you do more with less. And recruiting budgets for last year just came out, and we saw that South Carolina ranked 26th in college football. They spent, they spent just, but $1.1 million. Meanwhile, Georgia's spending like $4 million, right? It continues to hammer down that Shane Beamer is working very efficiently, and he's doing more with less, Mark. And I think that's kind of what you have to do at South Carolina, especially early on, right? You got to be master talent evaluators and master talent developers, because you're not stocking classes full of 5 and 6 5-stars and what have you. You're going to get your 4s, you're going to get your 5s, but you got to take these 3-star kids and find those diamonds in the rough. And they've done such a great job of developing kids. I mean, look at a Nick Imawari last year. That kid wasn't highly thought of, highly regarded. All he did was turn into a freshman all-SEC player. He's probably going to be preseason all-conference this year. So it's continuing to develop guys like that. And, they're winning these battles in recruiting, Mark. I don't know exactly where they're going to finish. But, again, back to my original point that I think anybody who had concerns about Shane Beamer and recruiting, I think it's almost just a given at this point. Like, they're going to recruit at a high level. Here's what's crazy, though, Mark. As well as their recruiting, they have yet to finish. I think they finished 7th in the SEC last year, on the edge of just the top half of the league. I mean, as well as I do, you can be 12th nationally, but you might be 6th in the SEC in recruiting. So it's just, It's so tough out here, man. You got to continue to stack good players on good players on good players. And I think the difference, and I had a former staffer at South Carolina, Eric Kimry. I don't think he'll mind me name dropping. He's now at Baylor High School in Tennessee. But he was on Shane Beamer's staff back in 2021. And he told me, Chris, the difference and where you really make up ground in recruiting and how you win in recruiting, it's not identifying the 5 stars and most of the 4 stars. Like, those guys are good. We know they're good. It's, can you identify the difference between the 150th best player and the 600th best player? And he brought up Nick Eamon-Warry to me as an example before Nick Eamon-Warry ever even took a snap, right? That was a guy they said, hey, this kid's being, vastly under-recruited. We saw him. We love him. We got him. So the more guys like that you hit on at South Carolina, especially early, the better. And that's exactly what they've done. And they continue to develop. And again, as you continue to win, you put another 8-win season out there, Mark, I guarantee you it'll be another star-studded class. And they're certainly on the way to doing that.
Makes total sense what you just said, because if you are this far behind Georgia and they're continuing to bring in the number 1, 2, or 3 class in the nation, and even if South Carolina brings in number 15, you're continuing to lose ground on the surface.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
I look at it, Mark, kind of like Moneyball, right? When he says that if we try to beat the Yankees in here, we will not beat the Yankees out there. We are card counters at the blackjack table. And I don't mean to say that it's like, oh my God, South Carolina's just not pulling in any talent. That's not what I'm saying. But to your point, if you try to beat Georgia, we're just going to go toe-to-toe for every 5-star. You're going to lose those battles. At this point, you are, right? Because there's more reasons, just call it for what it is. There's more reasons to go to Georgia than there is to go to South Carolina. There's more reasons to go to Georgia than basically to go to anywhere else, right? There's a reason they just nitpick guys. They pick who they want. Typically, when you get a top-rated player from Georgia, oh, Georgia didn't want him. I hate to say that, but it is just the truth, right? The rich get richer. So that's why, again, you got to be master talent evaluators and master talent developers, right? And you can win that way. It's what Steve Spurrier did. Connor Shaw was a 3-star. Dylan Thompson was a 2-star. DJ Swearinger was a 3-star. Melvin Ingram was a 3-star. The list goes on and on. Now, you got to mix in some of those Marcus Lattimores and Alshon Jeffries and Jadeveon Clowney's and Stephon Gilmore's. But I think at South Carolina, what you've seen when they've been at their best is when they've been able to take guys that were maybe diamonds in the rough, develop them, and they become superstars. And then I think in turn, Mark, again, you continue to win, more and more of these top-rated players like Nicholas Harbors are going to look at Carolina and say, oh, I can go there, I can get a great education, I can ball out, I can get to the NFL, and I can win a championship, which is what those guys want to do, man. There's no 5-star out there who wants to go 6-6, not many of them at least. So the more you win, the more of those guys you attract, and lo and behold, you look 5 years down the road, and you're pulling in 5 or 6 a year, and then you're really making up ground on the elites. But I think South Carolina's in a great position right now, Mark.
Chris Phillips, the Spurs Up Show. Always enjoyed the conversation. Always love having Chris on here. Chris, tell the folks the best way to get a hold of your content.
Yes, we're on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, at the Spurs Up Show. You can check us out there basically anywhere, anywhere you go online. You can find us, thespursupshow.com. Also our website. The podcast drops twice a week, Monday and Thursday on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. And of course, we have a daily live show called The Daily Crow, which airs noon to 2, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. We take questions, comments, calls as well. We got a hotline. We take text, and it's really just open to banter, open to discussion. That also drops via our podcast feed every single day after the fact at 3 o'clock. So it's a ton of content. We've also got a store, tsus.store, tons of merchandise. If you've seen the Beamer Ball stuff around, it came from yours truly, more than likely. So anyways, it's a lot of fun. Just the Spurs Up Show. Anywhere you find any of your content, any of your entities, you'll find us there. So Mark, I always appreciate it, man. It's always a blast chatting with you. Love talking college football, and I appreciate you having me on.
Enjoy the big baseball weekend. We'll catch you soon.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Mark.